If you will, open your Bibles with me to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12 has some important things that I want us to look at tonight and to take a close look at and think about for a few minutes. But before we get there, I want to remind you of Luke chapter 9, verse 23, where Jesus said, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must take up his cross. He must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." He must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Think of the implication of that for just a second. Jesus says, anyone must take up his cross. That means everyone has a cross. Everyone has a cross to bear. I don't know about you, but I don't really enjoy getting all of the email forwards that go around all the time. And I used to get a lot of them, and I would sometimes tell people I don't really enjoy getting a lot of emails because I get several emails every day, and they say if you don't pass this to 14 other people, then you don't love God and stuff like that. I don't appreciate them most of the time, but I got one. I say that because I got one several months ago from Wendy Mitchell, and I thought it was good, and I forwarded it to some people, and I've cut and pasted part of it. I didn't bring the whole thing, but I've put it on the PowerPoint. I haven't been using PowerPoint a lot lately, but I wanted to share this cartoon, quite frankly, is what it is, and it depicts people carrying their cross. And if you look at it, you see here the first slide is everybody carrying a cross, dragging it with them. Looks a little bit different than the guy I saw down before you go to a Lookouts game. He was carrying a cross around his shoulders, but he had wheels on the back of it so that it would roll. These crosses don't have any wheels. Well, the next slide focuses in on one person. I think of him as me. And this person puts his cross down and looks like he's crying, and he says, "Lord, it's too heavy. Please cut it down a little." But you can see it's him with a saw in his hand. And then you see the next slide, and I actually cut the slide out where he's actually doing the sawing himself. But the next slide shows that his cross is a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to carry. But it's not good enough for him. You see the third slide, and he's doing the same thing again. "Lord, please cut it down a little more. I'll be able to carry it better." And then the fourth slide, he's cut some more off of his cross, and he says, "Lord, thank you so much." But guess what? There was a bump in the road up ahead that he didn't know about. He gets to this bump in the road, and you see the next slide, and you see what all the other people who were carrying their crosses do. They get to the chasm, and they lay down their cross, and they walk across safely. But each person has his own cross, and each person has to carry his own cross. And this man gets there, and his cross won't reach. He needs his cross. His cross provides value to him that he never even saw. God knows what's up ahead. God knows what we need. God is preparing us for something in our lives. And when we try to substitute our judgment, when we try to impose our will on God, we ruin our lives. We wreck ourselves. We limit our possibilities to a tremendous degree. We all have a cross to carry. Look with me at Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12 gives us some insight into how to carry our cross. And here's what it tells us. It says, look at the other one who carried the cross first. Hebrews 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Notice verse 2. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. The Hebrew writer tells these people who are suffering a great persecution, a great amount of trial and tribulation, look at Jesus. He endured the cross. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Stare at Jesus, and you'll see how to endure your cross. So what I want us to do tonight is to look at how Jesus did it. What did he rely on? What was his mindset in carrying his cross? He carried a literal cross. He carried an actual heavy, rough-sawn piece of wood from a military compound through the city until he ran out of energy and fell, and then it was carried for him the rest of the way. But he also carried the sins of the world. The first way he did it was through obedience or submission. Turn back a couple of chapters to Hebrews chapter 5. Hebrews 5 verse 8 says, although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. Jesus was able to carry his cross because he was obedient, because he devoted himself to obedience. And you see this very clearly in the Garden of Gethsemane. You see this very clearly in his attitude on the night that he was betrayed. Literally at the same time that he was being betrayed, while Judas is on his way with the soldiers to the garden, Jesus is praying. And you remember what he's praying. He's praying, let this cup pass from me. He says, I don't want to endure this cross. But what did he say right after that? Luke 22, verse 42. Jesus' words are recorded. Luke 22, 42, he says, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but your will be done. That is obedience. Jesus expresses his desire to God. But along with his expression of his desire, he includes with it a statement, two statements of submission, two statements of obedience. If you're willing, not my will, but your will. He learned obedience from the things which he suffered. And that obedience allowed him, helped him to carry his cross. Secondly, his obedience was prompted by love. Look with me at John chapter 14. We're going to look at a couple of scriptures in the chapters around John 14. But in John 14, verse 31, Judas has already left the Last Supper. Judas has already been told to go with what you must do it quickly, and he's left. And Jesus is talking to the apostles that remain. And at the end of chapter 14 and verse 31, Jesus said, but so that the world may know that I love the Father, I do exactly as the Father commanded me. How did he achieve his obedience? How did Jesus achieve this attitude of not my will, but your will? This attitude of, I don't have to do it, but if you want me to do it, I will carry this cross to my own execution and allow them to drive nails into my arms and legs. Because I love the Father. Not my will, but your will. Because I love the Father, he says, so that the world may know that I love the Father. It's also because he loved his followers. If you back up a chapter to John 13. John 13, verse 1. It says, now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come that he would depart out of this world to the Father, he knew what was happening. He knew this was his last day. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. See, first we have the love of the Father. Now we have the love of those who were his in the world. The NIV translates it differently. The NIV says, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. Jesus' love for the Father, Jesus' love for his followers, propelled him to obedience. They propelled him to submission. They gave him the mindset and the motivation to say, not my will, but your will. Obedience prompted by love. You see this same love in John 17. This is still before the crucifixion. Jesus is praying in verse 9 of John 17. He says, I ask on their behalf, talking about his apostles. In verse 11 he says, I am no longer in the world, and yet they themselves are in the world. He's worried about his followers. He's worried about his apostles. Verse 15, I did not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. Verse 20, he says, I do not ask on behalf of these alone, but for those also who believe in me through their word. Look at what he's doing. He's hours from being arrested. He's less than half a day from being nailed to the cross, and he's praying for other people. He's praying for God's other followers. That's love. That's love. That love prompts obedience. That love motivates the carrying of a cross.